Okay, this is a review of the film What What the Hell. My sister had seen it, wants to discuss it, so I took a look at it, took notes, and have begun to organize some critique of the film. So this is a review. Uh, First, I'll just try to identify the the arguments of the film, what it says. It's trying to address, it wants to address the problem of uh, chronic diseases. So cardiovascular disease, uh, cancers, uh, diabetes, obesity. Those are the ones it names in particular. Wants to wants to address the rise in those chronic diseases, and to address at the same time uh, environmental degradation, which it identifies as being caused by factory farms. So, in order to do that, the documentary identifies the problems or the causes of the problems, and they are all the consumption of animal-based products. Um, so animal-based products, the consumption of fat causes insulin resistance, according to Dr. Neil Bernard, and that underlies the chronic diseases that we've identified. He says that fat from animals builds up on muscle cells, so that the sugar in the blood can't enter the muscle cells, and then this sugar then builds up in the blood and remains in the blood, uh, and that provokes the pancreas to release more insulin, so you have insulin resistance. So insulin resistance is caused by fat. What kind of fat is doesn't say fat. I mean, it could because with plant-based fats and there are uh, animal fats. But anyway, fat. Dr. Garth Davis says later on that it's the consumption of proteins that causes diabetes. So I see a contradiction there. Maybe there's an answer to it. Maybe the two have an answer to it. The film didn't offer me an explanation as to whether it's protein or fat that causes diabetes. Uh, because I think Neil Bernard is telling us that the fat causes insulin resistance, which is diabetes. Meat is carcinogenic, number one. Also, environmental toxins bioaccumulate, which means that whatever toxins are in the atmosphere or in the environment are going to be more intense, more present in both fish and animals, so that when humans eat the fish and animals, we are getting an extra dose, a more concentrated dose of carcinogen of toxins such as dioxin that exist in our environment. Uh, and so the solution to all of these issues, uh, to the environmental issues and the increase in chronic disease, is to no longer eat um, and no longer consume animal products. No longer consuming animal products would also put an end to the factory farm system. So you can see that there's a synergy there. Okay, now I'll rephrase the question, and I'm going to argue in a different way. And I think the documentary ref, um, limits or looks in too narrow a way at the problem. For instance, well, first I just want to say we have to address the epidemic of chronic diseases. Chronic diseases being cancer, cardiovascular disease, obesity, diabetes, um, autism, Alzheimer's disease. All of these are are really on an exponential curve. That is, they are becoming uh, more uh, e- more apparent, more evident, more common, uh, and fast. So we really are on a on an exponential curve towards catastrophe as far as uh, non-communicable diseases, chronic diseases go. And that insulin resistance is now let's just look at another argument that the documentary doesn't, or another explanation that the documentary uh, doesn't engage with. This is a polemic, this documentary. It doesn't look at other possible explanations. It doesn't look at other models. It doesn't look at it doesn't look wider than than uh, what it identifies as the, the problem, the cause of the problem, and the solution. In fact, I think we're going to see that these are very complex issues, and so let's just look at another explanation. And I've been convinced by the work of Dr. Timothy Noakes and Jason Fung. You can look them up, read their books. Their argument is something quite different, and it is that it is not fat that causes insulin resistance or diabetes, but carbohydrates. And carbohydrates are according to this other model, stored in the cells as fat. So it's not fat that makes you fat. I know that would be, that might sound um, odd, but fat doesn't make you fat. Fat is burned. Fat is one of our fuels. So is glycogen. Glucose, fructose, comes into the body and is stored through insulin. You know, insulin is secreted in the presence of sugar. It's stored in the body's cells as first the liver, muscles, and then cells as fat. So in fact, it is carbohydrates that is broken down, metabolized into sugar, sugar stored as fat. So in other words, and then now this is very much this would lead us in a different direction if that model is true, because then, and this is thoroughly denied by the or refuted by the doctors in this documentary. Carbohydrates in that case leads to, in fact, an underlying condition of insulin resistance. And that is what is, in fact, at the all of these other chronic diseases are symptoms of insulin resistance, and insulin resistance is caused by carbohydrates. That is the overconsumption of carbohydrates. So eat less carbohydrates and not more. And in fact, a ketogenic diet, a diet that relies principally on the um, on fat as fuel for the body. Uh, uh, um, Also, uh, you know, minimizes carbohydrates. The way you can start burning fat is by eliminating carbohydrates. So it's another option. You'd have to choose between those things. Now, just once again, this isn't a documentary that outlines various possibilities. In fact, it denies every specialist that the film um, interviews is vegan. So it's all it definitely, I don't think there's any question. I think the everyone in the film, I assume, acknowledges that they're on a mission, and that is and so, that is to eliminate all consumption of animal-based products, consumption of all animal-based products. So you have to go somewhere else if you want. You're not in this film because any kind of contradiction or any kind of any the complexities are not going to be in this film. And let's open one up right now. the issue of factory farms. Uh, no question in my mind. I accept. I accept. I mean, I've already. I understand factory farms and industrially raised, or you know, the livestock, the beef, pork, and chicken that are raised in these inhumane conditions as unacceptable, and I you know I refuse to eat any of those animal-based products. Those animal-based products are those factory farms are part of a much bigger system that they fit into. Now this I'm going to now offer something, a critique of the, or a different way of looking at this issue that uh, the documentary doesn't. Because the documentary by default says eat plant-based products. Now I do happen to eat a lot of plant-based products, and I get my carbohydrates from plant-based products, not from grains. And so what do I mean, well, I won't get into right now what I eat, but however, the core of our food, of our farm food industry. Now I call this complex the farm food drug complex. They're merging now. People, many of you may understand this, that and for a long time, at least the agriculture and food production has been merged into one complex, and now the pharmaceutical industry is being owned by the is merging into one conglomerate, one complex, which is the farm food drug complex. And that's what I call it. Now, to pull out just the animal part of that complex is going to miss an important point, and it won't help us when we come later on to try to heal the planet, which is one of the two goals of this film. And it won't help us either, I think, if they've got the medical model wrong. That is, if it's carbohydrates and not fat that is causing insulin resistance. By the way, we should stop right here and say that I don't know Neil Bernard didn't discuss what fat, because you can be a vegan and be on a ketogenic diet. You don't have to consume animal products. Fat, there are lots of sources of fat. So you can have saturated fat from uh, coconut oil, monounsaturated fat from olive oil, and there are all the or also avocados. You can get all kinds of fat there, and I assume that I don't know because they don't tell me, but I assume he's telling me that those fats as well cause insulin resistance. Now that if that's the case, because he only said fat, then Garth Davis talking about protein causing diabetes it really does contradict this issue. Now, what fat? Uh, so you can eat well, according to this documentary, as it's presented, you can't eat plant-based fats. I don't know where you get your fat if you don't eat them from plants, and you don't eat them from animals. I mean, if you eliminate all of this food group called fats, uh, there are polyunsaturated fats that are also have only been around for the last 100 years, and those are really, they call them vegetable oils, but they're not vegetable oils. They're made from grains, and uh, well, there's a lot of evidence that they disrupt the body, and I have eliminated those a long time. I'm talking about corn oil and all of the uh, sunflower oil as well. All of the oils, the polyunsaturated oils. Okay. By the way, those are recommended by the food pyramid and food guides, governmental food guides. Okay, so again, animal the factory farms are part of a much bigger farm food industry that is based on, I mean, if, across North America, uh, we are growing, that is, this industry, this complex is growing grains. And that is the core. And it is those grains, and 85% of those grains are GMO grains, and they're doused with glyphosate, a toxin. Well, it has been um, classified or patented as a herbicide and an antibiotic. So uh, the way that GMOs were engineered was to resist glyphosate. And now glyphosate is used in, it's the most common um, herbicide, antibiotic used in the world, and it's dousing and destroying the soil because it's killing the bacteria in the soil. So um, it is if the argument is that we can then, because the film doesn't address this issue, do they think should we be eating those grains? Those grains are also used to feed uh, the animals in factory farms, chickens, cattle, and pigs. Those are not biologically appropriate foods for those animals. Chickens are basically insectivores. Cows should be eating grass, uh, should be out in the pasture. Pigs are omnivores. But to feed them not only grains, but grains doused in a very toxic uh, uh, herbicide antibiotic that has been shown now increasingly to cause a havoc on the human gut, on our microbiome. That is the bacteria and other microbes that live in our that make up a human being. Really, we're a superorganism. We're not we cannot uh, uh, human genes cannot on their own keep a human being alive. We are in a sympathetic, a symbiotic relationship with our microbes. Now, glyphosate is killing them. That's what it's intended to do. So there's no surprise there. Um, so I'm going to my solution. If you if you look at the farm industry, the farm food complex from a different perspective, the problem isn't animal-based products. It's it's the whole. We're destroying the soil through the way that we're farming industrially, and the soil now soil is turning into dirt. Dirt is soil without life, without all the microbes in it, is dirt, and that that's leading to more and more the use of more and more uh, uh, additives, fertilizers, uh, herbicides, and this is all insecticides and so on, all of the biocides, and that's happening um, in a monocultural, in the context of monocultures all over North America. And that's the basis of our food system. Now, there are other answers to these questions, to these problems, and they are things that I'm doing here in my own, in my own backyard, and that is, and there are whole movements that you can look into as responses to this bigger problem of this bigger environmental problem. We'll see that it is also an individual problem, and that is you can look up biodynamic, regenerative agriculture. I prefer to call it regenerative gardening because I think we ought to be doing it at increasingly local levels and smaller levels, and also permaculture, which kind of encompasses a number of these practices. All of these practices are about rebuilding the soil, regenerating the soil that we have destroyed, over especially since World War One, since we started to use, since after World War One, when we started to use um, chemical fertilizers, which began to interfere on a monoculture scale. So that's a different way of looking at the problem of factory farms, and also let's not forget that those animals are being fed toxic things that are biologically inappropriate for them and toxic for them and for us. So, do we reject factory farms? Yeah, absolutely. You reject factory farms. Do you reject the larger system of the larger agricultural industry into which factory farms are a part? Yes, absolutely. You have to challenge all of those things, and there are many people doing it. Uh, Now, another thing that leads us to another issue, and that is the film doesn't um, uh, elaborate on this, but at the end it says, you know, without the factory farms, the world recovers, the nature recovers, and we live in harmony with nature again. However, not necessarily. If we haven't, I don't know, because we haven't discussed, the film attacks, challenges the consuming animal-based products. But it doesn't, so it's all negative in that sense. It's what not to do. It's not what to do. Except that what to do is, I mean, by default, eating plant-based products. But which plant-based products? How are they raised? In what kind of soil? Uh, Etc. Now, if the argument, and now I'm gonna switch a little bit and introduce another train of thought, another thread of analysis that's not in the film. But let's just take this notion further. If we're going to eat plant-based products, does that mean that we're going to take the prairies, let's say the prairies, that is the Canadian prairies and the northern plains in the United States, that's one ecosystem, one of the great savannas in the world. And those savannas have since the dawn of time been home to and have been building soil with ruminants, ungulates, like huge herds of bison. In other parts of the world, in Europe and in Africa, there are other animals, there are other ruminants, that is, animals, herbivores, the big herbivores. And they all have similar, it becomes a similar uh, ecology. They create out of these savannas a similar kind of ecosystem. The best source for this is Alan Savory. If we're going to continue to use those prairies, which by the way are turning into the soil is so badly degraded that in large parts you have to rebuild the soil to grow anything. However, can the soil on the savannas be recovered, regenerated? Can the biology be put back into the soil? That's the big question. What nature wanted to do, and what nature has done since, as I say, since even before Native Americans, the first nations came to North America, was it was built up with these herds of herbivores, bison. Uh, they pass through it, pushed along by wolves. So the huge herds of, we're talking about millions, pass through, eat the top layer of grassland, uh, you know, make little holes with their hooves that water falls in, the water accumulates in, and then after they've passed by, regeneration occurs. The bottom part of the roots, because the root these the grasses don't need the bottom parts of the roots since they're smaller now. At least the tops have been cut off. We're talking about grasses that are meters high. Now, the bottom part falls off. That becomes humus. So you're getting a real buildup of carbon in the soil. By the way, that carbon is sequestered from the atmosphere. So a lot of studies claim, well, that we can actually stop global warming by allowing the carbon that's in the atmosphere to return to the soil. Even if you can't, it would be to me, and now here I'll address the moral aspect of this film, would be the moral thing to do would be to try to live within nature and to recuperate, regenerate the soil, and regenerate the natural cycles that have gone on long before humans, and especially humans over the last 10,000 years, and even more especially within the last 100 years, and in the context of capitalism, have looked at nothing more but how much can we make, how much money can we make out of uh, this out of a practice and as quickly as we can. Okay, so if we if we go back to allowing all of these savannas around the world to regenerate, what happens is that we then need to allow the the herbivores back on. Now that is uh, which should be for I think a vegan, I hope, a positive thing. That is return the land to the animals that actually nurtured the soil. Now we've got a problem because if you wanted to use those prairies or plains to raise uh, corn, to raise grains, um, I don't know how you're going to do it if you've got if you're going to if you're going to regenerate the soil. Um, in other words, it's a strange thing that in the name of animal rights we come to exclude the great herbivores from the land. Unless we're doing permaculture, unless we're doing biodynamic farming, regenerative agriculture, we are also continuing to kill, that's what we're doing now, all of the microbes and all of the soil food web. Beyond the soil food web into that is all of the trillions of organisms that live in in just one plot of land. We've been killing them all. So now to get them back, to recuperate this all this land, um all of the plains, means that we have to allow bison back, or if not, other herbivores like cows. And we have to if we do it ourselves, we have to imitate how nature operated. Go and see Alan Savory for his very clear ideas on this. But the problem is, you can remain a vegan if you want to. You don't have to eat those cattle. You don't have to eat um, those bison. I don't know if you want to allow wolves to prey on them, but you don't have to eat them. However, you can't recuperate the land without them, not the savannas of the world. In my own little area in my backyard, I have created a biodynamic garden in which I'm encouraging all as much diversity as possible, and that's how I get my all of the not all of it. I get as much as I can of my plant-based foods out of that, and those are grown in biodynamically active soil. That means that I'm feeding my own microbiome at the same time. Uh, that's my main concern with with the film. It's not clear because they don't address the issue of the greater problem of the farm food industry complex and what it's doing and all of the toxins that it's putting into the atmosphere and into the humans that are that are eating it, the damage that it's doing in relation to greenhouse gases. That is, that it's not, that it doesn't allow carbon to be sequestered. Because don't forget, when I say carbon to be sequestered, the carbon is life. That carbon is life. All of the microbes that live in that soil are carbon based. So the plants as well are carbon based. So if we don't allow all that to get back into the soil and to be sequestered there, it can be sequestered for thousands of years in the soil. Uh, then we've got a bigger ethical issue. This documentary claims that the ethical issue is that humans are eating animals, I think, and we shouldn't be. Now I'll do something else. It does in a couple of instances try to makes very badly actually anthropological claims or anatomical physiological claims that human beings are not made to to ingest animal-based products. We're not made to do it. I don't think that's true. Uh, for it, I don't think it's true that we're not physiologically or anatomically made to be predators. In fact, there is a lot of anthropological evidence that, in fact, uh, our evolution since we split off from other primates was, in fact, precisely to become predators. Of course, we're not predators like lions, and we're omnivores, uh, but we're because we use tools. So, I mean, they may claim that our canine teeth aren't adequate to rip through flesh, but we never did that. I mean, for hundreds of thousands of years, and I'm talking about the Homo sapiens, and for millions of years, before that, since our ancestors split off and started walking upright about 8 million years ago, we have been we have been predators, and we have used tools. We learned to use tools to do that, and that's kind of obvious, I think. The other thing is that there really is no anthropological evidence, and here, if I'm wrong, you know, let me know what the evidence is for a vegan culture in our past. I mean, I'm talking about among our human ancestors, Homo sapien ancestors, and the human ancestors that before them. Is there evidence of any any one of our ancestors that was vegan? As far as I know, every all human ancestors were omnivores, hunter-gatherers. Uh, did we, so the notion that we aren't adapted to uh, metabolize animal products, uh, just I just don't think I think that you have a hard case to make. We always did. We always did, and we do. Now, what is the what is the other issue? We are talking here. The documentary wanted to address the issue of an exponential rise in chronic diseases. These aren't communicable diseases. These are chronic diseases. If you look at the graphs of all of these diseases that we've already laid out, they are exponential, and they start about 30 years ago, and they're getting worse. I mean, right now, the incidence of cancers, obesity, I'm talking especially here about North America and any other place in the world that has adopted a standard American diet, which is not meat-based, it's grain-based. The foundation of the diet since 1977, since the governments of Canada and the United States started to um, counsel people, advise people on what your populations on what you should eat. At the base of it all, always has been grains and cereals. You should be getting most of your calories, they say, from that. The film claims that the main uh, power behind us consuming being advised to consume animal-based products is that one arm of the farm food complex, the agricultural industry, and that is that which is concerned with meat and poultry. In fact, they didn't do a very good job if they have all the power, because in fact they're relegated to one food group, and the main food group is one that I've eliminated completely and got much healthier for it, and that's grains and cereals. Oh yes, okay. So if these chronic diseases have been so have the epidemic of these chronic diseases is very recent, 30 years. What should we be looking for as the cause? Animal-based products that we've been eating, consuming for about we and our primate ancestors for about 8 million years. I don't know, give or take, but at least Homo sapiens for 200,000 years, and a few million years before that, we've been consuming animal-based products. How is it that we got to this moment without this these non-communicable diseases, these chronic diseases? We've been eating grains and cereals, and a lot of them, since the 1970s. That coincides with this problem. What I'm saying is you can't have an epidemic now of these chronic diseases unless something else has changed. I mean, what has changed so that now we should have these non-communicable diseases? Another thing that could be working in synergy with it, not only the consumption of grains, but the consumption of grains and cereals and all food that are using huge amounts of pesticides and specifically glyphosate en masse. And that has been happening. That, as Stephanie Seneff and what's her name, Nancy Swanson, have demonstrated, almost perfectly correlates with the rise of chronic diseases, autism, cardiovascular disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes and obesity, Parkinson's. It goes on. So not only that, but if you look up their work, especially Stephanie Seneff and Samsel, Anthony Samsel, they have explanations for exactly, they have theories about the metabolic processes that are actually uh, that by which glyphosate is undermining our health. So to answer the question of non-communicable diseases, I would have been looking elsewhere, but I would have, and this documentary doesn't, I would have opened up my analysis, I mean my field of vision, to see what else is happening at the same time. It's not just animals. Animals are the factory farms are part of a much larger agricultural complex that is in my estimation, the place to look. Environmentally, to get diversity back, we look at uh, uh, bio biodynamic farming, regenerative agriculture, permaculture. None of those things either exclude or necessarily include consuming animal-based products. So the issue isn't, in my estimation, animal-based products. It's it's all of these other issues. It's the way we're farming, not consuming animals. It's where do those animals come from? They came from a complex that is doing damage to us, to the earth. So the actual answer to this issue is simple, but it comes down to the way we treat the earth, the way and allowing biodiversity. That's a difficult issue right now because of the powers that have been controlling uh, the and that are consolidating around a farm food drug complex are are pretty intimidating. So anyway, that I'm going to end it there. That's my that's it. That's my review of What the Health. Who was it by? That's my review of What the Health, directed, edited, produced, and written by Kip Anderson and Keegan Kuhn. Um, it made quite a stir last year. I don't know if people are still watching it. My sister watched it, so now she'll watch this, and we'll start talking about it.